So our second keynote speaker today is also another very special person, Mark Runco, a professor at the University of Georgia in Athens. He's actually the Paul Torrance Professor of Creativity. He is also the founder of the Creativity Research Journal, and he is the editor of that since the start of that endeavor. So as our conference is a multidisciplinary conference, we are switching from engineering now to psychology. And Mark, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, and thank you for that talk. I really enjoyed that, very much so. It is very different from what I'll be speaking about, but what interested me about your talk were the intersections. You said so many things which fit so well with creativity research. I wish I had time to explore them. I'll mention looking to nature, for example, and the bit about meetings. It's right, exactly right on. But we are shifting gears. I am a cognitive psychologist by training. I've been studying creativity now for approximately 30 years. My own bit of luck was to find the topic when I was an undergraduate, a sophomore to be example. And there was something about it that shifted my interest from athletics and maybe girls to creativity and psychology, and I've actually been doing it and don't feel like I've worked a day in my life. And that's, again, going back to the mid-1970s. I much of the time have focused on measurement, and in fact I was, in talking to Giovanni about topics, we thought about much of my work has been on measurement, and he was very kind to say, well, let's talk about measurement. And I will say quite a bit about measurement, but I found myself, as you'll see when we move through this talk, thinking as much about the field as a whole and its attitude about measurement as I have thought about and I will present about measurement per se. We will start with some basics about the measurement of creativity. The measurement of creativity is an attempt to be objective. It's an attempt to be scientific, if you will. There is a field which is especially useful, psychometrics. And psychometrics is, in general, the measurement of human behavior, in this case, creative behaviors. The principles of psychometrics are focused on minimizing error and chance, which is one of the things which makes creativity very special, because error and chance can play a role. And I believe, David, you actually touched on chance and taking advantage of errors. But measurement attempts to increase accuracy by lowering measurement error and bias, which is a systematic form of error. The focus of measurement is usually on developing reliable and valid assessments. And these days there are dozens. I myself have put a battery of tests together. About 2 years ago, I realized that I'd been working on creativity testing, again, for 3 decades, and I collected them all in one place. There literally are dozens of tests focused on different aspects or expressions of creativity, many of them focused on different age groups or domains to try and recognize domain differences in creativity and so on. The advantages of being objective and having accurate measurements, I've put up there diagnoses and prognoses. Usually in the sciences it's described as description and prediction. Skinner said to control and predict human behavior. These are all very basic aspects of psychometrics. You may be saying, well, you know, this is creativity. Why do we need to do any of this? The first of these, the description of human behaviors, is a very useful thing to do, the description of creativity. And I have baselines up here because one of the special uses of creativity measurement is for doing research. And that research may be program evaluation, and my own interests are in enhancement and education. And you need to start somewhere, and you need an accurate description of where you're starting. That is the baseline. It is also very useful to have an accurate prediction, what you can expect, and again, with my own interest in education and enhancement, to know what you'd expect out of any attempt to fulfill creativity. This is useful or especially relevant in the present case, given the assumption I'm making that if we can look at creative potentials and attempt to fulfill them, we will have more inventive people in the future. And notice I've made the jump from creativity to invention, something I'll touch on several more times in this talk. To give one example about the predictive validity offered by some tests, I'll just mention very briefly the 50-year follow-up of the Torrance test of creativity, which was published in 2010 or 11 or maybe 12. Was recently published, and this follow-up does in fact cover a 50-year period. 2012, I got it. Torrance tests of creativity were administered going back into the 1950s, and that same sample was followed with follow-ups regularly for well over 50 years. And in 2012, a 50-year assessment or a study of the predictive validity of these tests showed them to be significantly correlated with behavior 50 years later. In other words, we can give a test and in one point in time and wait 50 years and we'll still have an understanding. That is our prediction. We'll still be accurate about the creativity of these same individuals. There are some qualifications of that. The Torrance tests of creativity are focused on ideas, which is also the focus of my own work. These tests are focused on divergent thinking. They're very focused assessments. The criteria involved here had to do, or the criteria where we had accurate assessments had to do with personal creative successes more than public creative successes. And my point here simply has to do that we do need to qualify this idea, but it is actually pretty impressive, I believe, that we can give a paper and pencil measure and have a statistically significant correlation of behavior which is likely to occur 50 years later, over a 50-year time period. I have invention as an example down here because I do believe that creative potentials are related to invention and the capacity for invention. And I believe that one of the things we can do in an attempt to predict inventiveness is to look at creativity, or again, touching on my theme of enhancement, one of the things we should be doing if we want inventive people is to ensure that their creative potentials are fulfilled. Again, more on that as we move through the talk. Okay, much of that was really just basics of measurement, and I really did try and put that into a nutshell to move through that quickly, but I was obligated to touch on a number of these concepts with measurement in my title. It's probably going to be of more interest if we think about what's usually called discriminant validity. Discriminant validity is a psychometric method or set of methods which allows us to determine the degree of overlap or the correlation between various things. In this case, creativity with all of these things I've listed here. In other words, psychometricians are often interested in making sure that we're studying what we think we're studying, and we're not studying something which is related but distinct. If we study, and actually I should jump to number 2 there, intelligence. There has been great debate over the relationship between creativity and intelligence. When I first started studying creativity, this debate was even more heated, although even at that point in the 1970s, people were saying, okay, creativity and intelligence are related, but not one and the same. They're not synonymous. I was reading work from the 1960s where you had every opinion. You had people saying, for example, that creativity is entirely dependent upon intelligence. that it's a subclass or a specific form of intelligence. And these people, of course, were saying, A, we don't need to study creativity if we understand intelligence, and B, we don't need to educate for creativity as long as we educate for intelligence. After all, if they're one and the same, we don't need to do anything special, in this case for creativity. That view has been qualified because in some instances intelligence supports creativity. In fact, in the case of invention and in many real-world examples of creativity, it is best if you have creative skills as well as intelligence working for you, as well as a few other things like persistence and luck. But statistically, psychometrically, and educationally, we can and should recognize the differences, the discriminant validity, if you will, between creativity and intelligence. And I will touch on a couple of these, and we can't go through the entire list or it would take us exactly one semester. And I say that because this is one of the classes I teach. Creativity, what it is and what it isn't, and that's what we do. But I will mention a few of them. You may be looking at number one there, originality. All creative things are original. It's the key defining characteristic. It's probably the only thing you find in the multitude of definitions of creativity. That is that all creative things are in some way original. They are more than original, which is exactly why we can put this on the list here of examples of discriminant validity, because you can say that there is great overlap or interdependency between originality and creativity. But creative things are more than that. They're also effective. There is some sort of utility or usefulness or fit. If you happen to be using your creativity to solve a problem, your creative solution solves the problem. It's got that kind of a fit or effectiveness. Sometimes, for example, in the arts, the effectiveness is much more subjective and personal. There may be an aesthetic sort of utility to creative insights or behaviors, depending upon the domain in which you're working. You can have originality without creativity. They are distinct, and this has been demonstrated. Hopefully the logic of that is clear, but this has also been demonstrated psychometrically. That is, we have discriminant validity between originality and creativity. One last point on originality, and this is kind of the extreme case, but one way to really separate originality from creativity is to think about extreme cases of originality. For example, psychosis. Psychotic individuals are enormously original, but they are not creative. They are too far out of touch with reality, to put it in marginally psychological terms. Interestingly, there have been studies where psychotics have been given creativity tests. I can't imagine doing that research, but it has been done. There's published research on that, and as I just stated, they're enormously original. They give ideas that no one else thinks of, probably because of their psychosis. But their ideas more often than not, depending on the level of psychosis, have no connection with reality and are not practical. The effectiveness is lacking, and you would not call them creative. Imagination, another fascinating correlate of creativity. Imagination usually defined in terms of the transcendence of reality. The thing that really interests me here is that for many years, imagination was applied primarily to children. And there you describe the imaginative play of children, for example. But in recent years, the lifelong contributions of imagination have been recognized, including in the work of MacArthur Award winners who apparently are creating imaginary worlds and using them throughout their lives to help them solve problems and alter their perspectives on the problems in their research. These paracosms are often used, especially at very high levels of creativity, and at least in the sciences, which is the only group I can cite in terms of actual empirical research. Innovation, again, I would say correlated. We have discriminant validity. Incidentally, this is one of the current drivers of creativity research. There is enormous interest in innovation. About half the invitations I receive to speak are at schools of business. I've held appointments of schools of business. There are journals looking at innovation and creativity, and of course, this is a good thing. But we do have to admit that there is discriminant validity. There is distinctiveness. I would say that creativity and innovation are probably related about the same way that creativity and inventiveness are related. That is, that creative potentials support innovation, but with innovation, there is a little bit more to it. In fact, one definition of innovation is that whereas creativity has a balance of originality and effectiveness, innovation has a little bit different ratio. Instead of originality being primary and effectiveness secondary, in innovation, the effectiveness is primary and the originality is secondary. There are other views which use, for example, stage theories of creativity, which look at the creative process moving through phases or stages, and they're useful when looking at innovation as distinct from creativity because they sometimes suggest that there are more stages required of innovation. That you can be creative by going through, let's say, the 4 classic stages: preparation, incubation, illumination, verification. In innovation, that may not be enough. You may need application and implementation. So there may, the difference between innovation and creativity may be in terms of the process and the length of the process, if you will. Invention in the literature is very product-oriented. That is, you have creativity, but there is a tangible result. And before giving this talk, I went back through the creativity research for 25 years and searched invention to see what work we had published in the Creativity Research Journal, just to remind myself, yes, I admit it, I can't remember nearly a portion of what's been published in the journal I added over 25 years. So I did a search, and by far the largest number of papers on invention in the Creativity Research Journal focus on patents. Now, patents are pretty darn indicative of inventiveness. It's a very objective assessment or indicator of inventiveness. Now, that's a point I want to come back to, but the point here is simply that inventiveness may differ from creativity in part because of the product orientation of invention. Insight, divergent thinking, and in fact the list of correlates could be much longer, but in the present context I need to be to move on. Okay, so we have measurement, and it's very useful in many ways. The focus of much research is, in fact, trying to accurately assess creativity and perhaps invention. This is very useful for research, for program evaluation, and for education and enhancement. As I said, to ensure that we are targeting what we think we're targeting. Now, hopefully all of this sounds, again, pretty darn straightforward. The interesting thing is that that's a very blurry transparency. Forgive me for that. That's a projective test. We can test our creativity here by projecting and offering original interpretations. Originally, it was the cover of the Creativity Research Journal. And up to this point in my talk, I've been talking about the strengths of measurement and the principles, especially reliability, predictive validity, discriminant validity. The interesting thing is that the Creativity Research Journal is, in fact, 25 years old. I'm working on volume 26 now. When I started that, there was one other journal, the Journal of Creative Behavior, which is still around and doing quite well. But in the 1970s, when I was a graduate student, in the 1980s, when I founded this journal, the Journal of Creative Behavior published many speculative pieces. Not every issue contained what I would consider, and what other people would consider, rigorous scientific, psychometrically sound research. And in fact, at about this point in time, the late 70s, I decided I was fascinated by creativity and wanted to go to graduate school and wanted to write a dissertation, and I was told, don't do it. do not focus your graduate studies on creativity. It's not rigorous enough to be psychology. Psychology is a social science. You won't get away with it. You won't pass your degree, you won't earn your doctorate, you won't get a job, etc. I was told that at least a dozen times because I wanted to find out where I could be doing a dissertation and focus my graduate work on creativity. I was told not to do it. Fortunately, I found a wonderful place to do it and had the support, one creativity specialist, one psychometric specialist, one cognitive specialist, and an outside examiner who knew a little bit about most of those things. I was able to do it, but my point is that in the 1970s and 80s, the field of creativity was still not recognized as a science. I founded this journal so there would be one place for rigorous scientific work on creativity. That was the sole intent and guiding interest I had. I believed that we could be objective about creativity. I felt that measurement principles could be applied to much, perhaps not all of creativity, but much of it. And it would give us useful information, not a 100% comprehensive explanation of creativity, but useful information, information that could be used socially to fulfill creative potentials, developmentally, educationally, and so on. When the journal first started out, we were publishing a very wide range of papers on a wide range of topics with a wide range of methodologies, including, for example, case studies of famous people, qualitative studies, interviews, observations. Jump ahead 25 years. We can't do any of that. We have probably nearly 10 times as many papers submitted. At this point, I have to turn down half of them without sending them out for review because I know we can't publish everything. At this point, we no longer publish qualitative research, just to give one example. There are other journals where you can publish it, but the CRJ no longer has such a wide range of options. We have a very small niche because of changes in the field. Now, the really ironic thing is that I look back at my own efforts founding this journal, and I think I was arguing with people that we can be objective about creativity. Well, these days, I have almost the opposite argument. I was listening to David's talk thinking that maybe I'm just a contrarian. Back then, people were saying we can't be objective, and I said, yes, we can. And now too many people are being overly objective, and I'm saying, hey, back up here, folks. We need to recognize that creativity is a special topic. We should not be overly objective. Now, what do I mean by overly objective? Since the 1980s, there has been a shift, and I'd be tempted to call it an obvious shift. It is obvious to me, looking at the field for having a 30-year perspective and perhaps especially being the editor of a journal. There's been a shift towards objectivity, which has led people to look towards measures that focus on persuasion. Now, persuasion is kind of an interesting phrase, and to explain that, I have in parentheses there the fifth P. And that is because, in fact, do I have a slide here? No, I guess I don't. Often, creativity research is categorized and described using 4 Ps. That is, research might focus on creative places, creative people, the creative product or creative process. Place, person, process, and product. Yes, I did it right. I can count to 4. But not too long ago, although actually Dean Simonton's work goes back to 1975 or 76, Dean Simonton, an extremely capable and prolific researcher, has argued that we need to be as objective as possible, and that we can be objective by focusing on people and things which change the world. He believes that creativity changes the way other people think. And for that reason, he focuses entirely on what I would call unambiguous cases of creativity, eminent creators, famous creators. And about these people, you can be pretty objective, in part because if a person is famous, we tend to have good records about them. But also, most of the people, especially in this historiometric research, are in fact productive. You can count their publications. You can count whatever they've published, scientific or otherwise, or their performances, or their designs. You can count how many things they've done, making what they've done highly objective. Admittedly, some of the objectivity in this historiometric work is based on what I'll call archival data. Simonton and many others will look at encyclopedias or who's who and count how many words are devoted to a person. And according to Simonton, the more eminence an individual has, the more attention they will be given in an encyclopedia. So there's a kind of objectivity there in counting how much attention these people, and this is a reflection of what he has called persuasion. It's called persuasion because it starts with a P. You probably noticed that earlier I said person, product, process, and place. It's an alliterative scheme, and Simonton is focused on, and people doing similar work, on creativity as it changes the way other people think, but it fits nicely into the alliterative scheme if it's called persuasion. Starts with a P. Excuse me. Thank you. Social judgment has also become very common. And in fact, I probably should have put as a key example of this, consensual assessment. These are assessments where you have a consensus. You have appropriate judges examining some sort of creative work to determine whether or not it's creative. Attributional theory, and this is related to the first two. Attributional theory is involved when you have appropriate judges attributing creativity to a person or a product. Productivity itself is often used, and as I've said, very frequently in research, especially with unambiguous cases, the number of publications or performances or designs or whatnot, these things are counted. My point really is that you see much more work on creative products and on unambiguous cases of creativity, and much more reliance on the objective scores, such as consensual assessment, these days in the creativity research, than I think is warranted. In fact, I would say that we started with that, not enough objectivity, and we've gone too far in the other direction. And very frequently, I speak with people and I write about trying to find a better balance between highly objective measures and measures which are still reliable, but allow us to study, for example, the creativity of children, or my favorite topic, potential. It is my firm belief that this is by far the most important topic for our understanding of creativity and invention. I think what we should be studying if we want more inventors is creative potential. And what we should be investing in is the fulfillment of that potential. Now, this does not sit well with the people I mentioned before who emphasize objectivity, because potential is a difficult topic. If it was an easy topic, it frankly wouldn't be potential. The individual would be productive. Since they're not yet productive, we say, okay, they've got potential. We think it's there. It's probably there, but we can't be sure. We can't count it. It is a risky target. It is a risky investment. But it is my firm belief that if we use measurement techniques so we do have some good predictive validities and we rely on reliable information, that it is worth the risk to invest in potential. We will have much more bang for our buck if we translate the enormous amount of potential that's in society such that people with mere potential will in fact be inventive and creative and productive. But if we only study productivity, well, we're going to miss the boat with many people who need something. That is, who only have potential and still need something before they can convert it to actual productivity. My own work on potential, obviously I don't have time for this. I would love to take the time to do it, but as a matter of fact, this is also another semester. Much of my own work is focused on potential in the form of ideation. I believe that this is one area, that is the construction of ideas, where we can both be objective but understand mere potential. And this is what you see with tests of divergent thinking. This is a short list of some of the work I have going with a wonderful team of graduate students on bilingualism, problem finding, working with entrepreneurs and the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, test of creative potential, working with very young preschoolers with 3D tests, looking at their ideation and their originality, and attempting to understand their potential in this manner. I believe that divergent thinking tests offer us one way to reliably examine creative potential. There is, as I said, work specifically on invention and creative potential. Given the time, I think I will just say, if you're interested in the work in the Creativity Research Journal dealing with invention, please send me an email and I can describe, and of course even send you the link to some of the articles. I, with more time, was going to describe two of them. Oh, and there's the 4 Ps. I knew I had them up there. And an example of the creative process. I'm actually, here we go. Jumping ahead to my final slide here, the key points. I think it's interesting that the field started one way, not believing in the objectivity of creativity, and has taken this to the extreme. I do believe this is why you now have such a large number of programs. You have at least 5 journals, academic journals now, focusing on creativity. It's difficult to keep up. At one point, creativity was, I read everything, and I believed I'd read everything on creativity research. Those days are past. I'm working 60 hours a week, and I can't keep up because of the explosion in the work. But I think things have gone too far, and that's really the point I'd like to make, the point I would hope that you walk away with here, that we can be objective, shouldn't take this too far, and that we should appreciate individuals with creative potential, and in fact invest in creative potentials when we can. And for the sake of time, I'm going to conclude on that point. Thank you very much for your time. I don't know if you want to.
Thank you, Mark. This was an excellent, excellent talk. And I'm sure that when you say objectivity has gone too far, you are talking about a community which is specialists in creativity. But here, this is a very mixed community. Many people who are entering the field of creativity for the first time. And I'm sure that your words came as a big surprise. So now this field is too objective, and we have to go back. Because that is something that is still something that is very new for us. So let's start with the questions, please.
You want me to use the microphone?
I can hear you pretty well. Well, can't hurt.
Thank you. Having created and published something called the Gifted Children Monthly for many years, and having been a friend of Paul's, I ask you if you've identified, particularly a younger child, which measures well in your terms of creativity, what specific curriculum would you suggest for that child, as obviously there is a different need than from the children who did not test well for creativity?
Excellent question, fitting with my own interest in education enhancement, so thank you for that. There are various ways to answer that. I just came from the Mississippi Association for Gifted Children. I didn't even get to go home. I came straight from Mississippi here. No, I'm overjoyed to be here, so it's not your fault at all. And I was speaking with teachers, and I can in 2 minutes or less summarize what I was talking to them about. Some of it had to do with their own behavior, so not curriculum per se. And there is a pretty useful model that focuses on teachers as models of creative behavior, modeling the social learning concept, where teachers will display how to do creative things. Although for my money, the advantage of modeling, and this is true in the home and the school, is that modeling communicates values to children. And in particular, communicates the idea that creativity is a good thing. And when children see their parents or their teachers or anyone that they respect, whom they respect, being creative and valuing creativity, they want to do it too. And the reason I think that values are so darn important is it's kind of like the energy behind personal investments in creativity. If you value creativity, you'll find a way to try and be creative. And it may be, there are all kinds of different ways that may occur, but the values will energize the process. Teachers should also provide opportunities to practice creative behavior, and knowing Paul and my own work on divergent thinking, some of this would have to be, some of the practice would be specifically in generating ideas and being fluent and flexible and original with them. And you may say, okay, that's pretty darn easy, but I always ask teachers how much of the curriculum allows the production of original ideas. And at that point, they stop looking at me. I ask them how many of their tests that they are able to administer in the schools allow convergent thinking, that is finding the correct answer, versus divergent thinking. Both of those are important for creativity. Therefore, tests and curriculum should strike some sort of balance. And again, the teachers are not their fault, but they're not able to give tests like that. They're 95% at least convergent without much opportunity for divergent thinking. Teachers also need to reward and support creativity, which is kind of a tricky thing because creativity is often intrinsic, and sometimes extrinsic rewards can actually undermine the intrinsic interest. So you need to be very careful about that. Depending upon the age, the curriculum can involve the production of ideas. For very young children, there needs to be an opportunity for self-expression. I believe that's primary for young children's creativity. Older individuals have developed metacognition. They can think about their own thinking and monitor it. Their curriculum probably would be much more tactical. They would use specific heuristics and strategies for approaching a problem in a creative fashion. And I could go on. Frankly, there are a huge number of things that can be done, practical things, in the schools and in the home. So forgive me for cutting it short. That's just a very brief list of examples. Very good question, though. Thank you.
Okay, again, we would listen to you all day. One more question, then we'll break. Okay?
Yes, sir. Here it comes.
Here it comes.
Thank you. You showed us a very interesting list of what correlates with creativity, and I would suggest you should add another item, which is courage. Like it takes courage for me to stand up in front of all those experts in
I like
creativity.
that.
And the example I would give you is in a book by a famous creator, Charlie Towns, who created the first laser. And he wrote a book, How the Laser Happened. And he tells you that he was in the lab with his graduate student, Jim Gordon, trying to demonstrate the first maser, the predecessor of the laser. And then two Nobel laureates walk into his lab, Rabi and Kush. And they tell him, look, Charlie, we know that what you're doing will never work. You should know it, and you should quit doing this because you're embarrassing Columbia University. And then came the act of courage. Charlie said, I know it will work, and I have tenure, and I will continue. And 3 months later, the first maser worked. But it's all in the book.
I will read it. When you said a famous book, I thought you were going to mention The Courage to Create, the title of Rollo May's book, with pretty much that focus. And I do like your example. I almost brought up courage with the curriculum, because my own belief is that it is probably courage, or what a psychologist would call ego strength, that is the most important thing for us to support in children. And the reason I believe that is that children are highly creative. I believe they're more creative than adults. They don't make assumptions. They don't have routines and habits and traditions. They don't even understand conventions and social behavior until they get to pre-adolescence. And their brain matures and they start internalizing conventionality, if you will. Children are enormously creative. What we need to do is to protect it. But what usually happens through culture and socialization is they do become social animals. And of course, thank goodness for that. I would say the same thing about balance of being original and being conforming in children that I do about research, being objective but also being a little bit flexible. Children need to learn to make decisions. They need to learn to exercise discretion such that they can maintain their originality and express themselves and be creative some of the time, but also make a good decision maybe when they're taking a test or driving is an example, not that kids drive, but I always say, don't be creative when you drive. That's a good time to be a conformist. Don't break any laws, don't hurt anybody. There are times in life to be conventional and times to be unconventional. And I believe our youth have the potential to be creative and unconventional, but what they need is to make these decisions and to develop ego strength so they can do what you're talking about. So they can be courageous and some of the time express themselves in original fashion. Thank you very much. Excellent point. And we will conclude here. Thank you again.